was Fatalism by Johnny Blues and the Bucket Kickers, exploring their more ambient side with their song Fatalism. And this is another apologetic show exploring a topic related to fatalism. On today's show, we will be speaking about the topic of free will and how it relates to other areas of apologetics. I will be responding largely to another apologist on here who has a difference of opinion regarding free will, but I will be responding to him nonetheless. The apologist in question is the Messianic Drew, who will henceforth be called Drew, and his video on the subject, or videos, I should say, can be found in the description bar below. They are titled The Incoherency of Compatibilism and Why No Theist Should Be a Compatibilist. In this video, I will defend compatibilism and provide argumentation against his view of free will, which is called libertarianism. For those of you who don't know the difference between the two positions, I will sum it up as such. Libertarians believe in two things. One, we require the ability to do otherwise for free will, and two, the falsehood of determinism of any variety, and these two put together create the libertarian perspective. A compatibilist, on the other hand, is someone who holds that free will is compatible with a form of determinism and the ability to not do otherwise, or the inability to do otherwise. So we disagree mostly on those two things, but we still hold that we have free will. The video to tackle is why no theist should be a compatibilism first, and then we'll move on to the second video. The first claim that is made by Drew is not really a philosophical point, but a historic one, but I think it is fair to still touch on it. He claims that compatibilism is not the view of Augustine, and this is something that I have a difficult time believing. In one of his works, I believe it's pronounced the Enchiridion, but I could be wrong. I will just call it the Augustine Catechism, as that is another title that my book on the matter gives to it. Augustine says, "But can this part of the human race to which God promises freedom and an eternal kingdom be rewarded for its works? Certainly not. What good can one do who is ruined, except insofar as he is set free from his ruin? Can he perhaps do good by the free choice of his own will? This too must not be thought, for it was by evil use of his power of free choice that man ruined that power in himself, just as a person who kills himself is alive when he does so, but by doing so becomes no longer alive, nor is he able to revive himself once again after he has killed himself. So, once sin is committed by free choice, sin is the victor, and free choice is also lost." For Augustine, salvation cannot be willed through one's power of free choice because of original sin. However, it must be given by God in his grace. Without it, God knows man cannot do otherwise. In that respect, Augustine is a compatibilist. He also denies that humans are the primary ordinator of their wills. He says in the Augustine Catechism, "These are the great works of the Lord, sought out according to all his purposes." In this one, Augustine is quoting Psalms 111, verse 2 from the Septuagint. The quote goes on to say, "And sought out so wisely that when creatures, both angels and humans, had sinned, that it had not what he willed, but what they willed. The Creator fulfilled what he willed by means of that very will of the creature, by which what was against his will was done, making good use even of evil creatures, as befits the one who is supremely good, for the damnation of those whom he has justly condemned to punishment, and for the salvation of those he mercifully predestined to grace. For as far as they were concerned, they did what God did not will. But as far as the omnipotence of God is concerned, they were in no way able to contravene his will by the fact that they acted against his will. His will was done through them. These good and evil wills are ordained by the will of God for the purposes of his way by his omnipotence. He says they cannot contravene God's omnipotence, so God ordains what will happen, and they cannot do otherwise. Also note that this is not simple foreknowledge. God does not foreknow and thus foreordain according to his will. Now, a defense of Augustine as a libertarian might be that his compatibilism is only the case insofar as salvation concerned. That may be so, but how is this relevant to the fact that Augustine does not hold libertarian properties as necessary for free will? For Augustine, these libertarian elements would be superfluous to free will, not necessarily to it. So the historical disagreement is out of the way, and I'm going to commence to the rest of his video's arguments. Drew gives definitions of compatibilism, libertarianism, determinism, and indeterminism. They can be found in his original video, but the definitions I give to his position also do justice as well. The arguments he gives are twofold. Reasoning can only be done with an agent with libertarian free will, and the second one is the problem of evil cannot be solved without free will. Drew also argues that libertarian free will has to be presumed as coherent because God would have it and all Christians would have to affirm it. The problem with this argument is that at best it proves libertarian free will is coherent when it comes to God and not other beings. I could, for example, hold that because God timelessly knows what I will do, I will necessarily do what God knows me to do and not otherwise. Furthermore, he can send a prophet who predicts what I will do, and thus his prediction will be temporally bound, not to mention that will be the truth maker about my future actions. This is to say, what is it in reality that makes propositions about what I will do in the future the case? If the future has yet to happen, how will God know what I'll do? Either he determines them, or there is some fact about us that determine us. However, even this concedes too much. In a blog of mine, I worked out a compatibilist model where God maintains aseity. This is based off of Anselm's dialogue. I will quote the most important part with some minor paraphrasing. I quote, Anselm's work on the freedom of choice concerns a dialogue between himself and a student on the question of God's freedom. Concerning the capability to either sin or not sin, according to his student, is necessary for free will, and God cannot sin. Therefore, it would follow that God is not free to act. That is, he does not have free will. Anselm argues to the contrary of what a student is telling him, that freedom is the capacity to act upon the correct action. For God, not only does he have the capacity to do good, that's all he does. It means that he is the most free of all beings. The notion of doing or acting on the correct action might be weird for modern readers, but for medieval thinkers like Anselm, truth was not only limited to propositions. Truths are not just descriptions of how things are, but how they ought to be. Anselm's belief can be found in the work on truth. Here Anselm defends his view by claiming that once a statement is declared as true, that's not only how reality is, but that's how it ought to be. Consider the nature of a triangle. All triangles have an internal sum angle of 180 degrees. If I were to draw a triangle, then it ought to have things like an internal sum of 180 degrees and straight lines. Anselm follows a Platonic line of thinking. The more a particular being has truth, the closer in truth it is to being itself, or the exemplar of all beings. Anselm follows the same line of thinking with free will. The more a particular being has the capacity to choose good, means that it is free in terms of how it participates in action. It is beholden to the good. It is beholden to what is the very exemplar of freedom itself. If a being was capable of being overcome by sin, it would be a loss of freedom. For God creating the universe was not only a free act, it was the act which was most free. God was not caused by something higher than himself, for he has aseity, nor does his nature determine what actions he takes. Rather, he is his own very nature. This is kind of going to come with the package of divine simplicity. For more on that, please see the related video. Rather, what we call God's free will comes from God's causal relation to his effect. Since we know particular truths to the truth itself, we measure how particulars ought to be through what the ideal is. And with that, I'll end the paraphrasing. If one goes to the original source of the blog, the words that are presented there are going to be very different because different formatting. But there we have a compatibilist free will that accepts aseity thanks to St. Anselm. Now, on to the first argument against compatibilism. According to Drew, compatibilism cannot distinguish why a reason for a conclusion belongs to an agent and not under a coercive means like drugs. While Drew goes on to critique certain definitions, here is my own. A reason belongs to an agent if and only if it is a proposition that is comprehended, rationally warranted, and arrived through sober deliberation by the agent. The sobriety criterion makes it impervious to coercion through computer chips and drugs. This also does not make it amenable to attribution to a computer or a notepad because there is no comprehension going on with these things, only a process of manipulating code in the case of the computer or taking ink in the case of a notepad. The next point he brings up is that on compatibilism, we would be doing the most rational thing. The problem with this view is that it ignores the presence of sin affecting our choices, not to mention, I don't see how it follows. Rationality is only ingredient to free will. It is not the only ingredient. It is not the only factor, as emotion and other rational commitments also affect our choices. The next problem that is brought up is the problem of evil. Now, for Drew, he believes that some kind of free will defense, or a libertarian free will defense, is the only way to combat the problem of evil. Yet, I also give a solution to the problem on my own video, where I utilized Thomas Aquinas' solution to the problem of evil and explain it in detail. That I will link in the description bar below for those who have not seen it. So with this, I will move on to the last argument to be found on his video, the incoherency of compatibilism. Drew reformulates the consequence argument originally given by Peter von Inwagen, and he applies it specifically to theistic determinism. The argument goes, the eternal decree of God is not up to us. That's the first premise. The fact that the eternal decree of God entails all future facts is not up to us. The third premise is, if something is not up to us, anything it entails is not up to us. The fourth premise is, no future facts are up to us. The fifth argument is, there are future facts entailed by the eternal decrees of God that are not up to us. And lastly, compatibilism is false. The last premise follows because if any fact about us or any future fact about what we do is not up to us, therefore compatibilism is false. And thus the notion of determinism kind of throws out the notion that any fact can be rendered false by us in some way. The best way to attack this argument is the second premise. While God's decrees are not up to us, what they will entail are, in a sense, is up to us because their entailments are contingent on some fact about us. If I decree that a triangle is to be drawn, it entails that a shape with an internal sum of 180 degrees will be drawn. If triangles did not have the feature of having an internal sum of 180 degrees, then the fact of me drawing them would be rendered false. It does not mean that the internal sum of a triangle is up to me, it just means that it comes entailed with the decree. Likewise, if God's decree that a human being of assessing a rational obligation is to create them, then the fact of his free will is essential to what a human being is. A human is in essence a rational, social, and spiritual animal, and in that can be held responsible. As an essentialist, I believe God cannot create a human being who doesn't have some potency for free will. In this sense, our human nature is not up to God, even though his decrees dictate it exist. He can even dictate what a human will assent to, and keep the will free as long as he does not move the will to intend contrary to how it acts. With this, I will end the show and play us out with a bit of classical music. Don't forget to check out this week's blog post in the description bar below. And also, thank you to the Messianic Drew for his incredible series of videos. His channel can be found in the description bar below.